$34. That is all Aria Harper held in the crumpled envelope she kept hidden beneath the loose floorboard under her bed. $34, and the Mercy Street shelter needed $125,000 in exactly 3 days, or the doors would close forever. Emma would disappear into the system. Another child lost to a machine that swallowed the small and broken and never gave them back. The marble floor of Calabrese restaurant gleamed under crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths stretched across tables like snow, and somewhere between the clinking of wine glasses and the low murmur of dangerous men, Aria moved invisibly in her black and white uniform. She had learned years ago how to be nobody. How to fade into the background like a ghost, quiet, faithful, invisible. Her hand stayed busy. Her eye stayed down. She never spoke unless spoken to. Never existed unless someone needed her to exist. Until the kitchen staff cornered her near the pantry. Maria, the head cook with flour perpetually dusting her dark hair, stepped in first. Her voice carried the weight of someone used to giving orders. "Aria, come here. We need to talk to you about something." Gina and Rachel blocked the exit, arms crossed, grin spreading across their faces like this was entertainment. "What is it?" Aria asked, her fingers gripping the edge of her cleaning cloth so tightly her knuckles went white. "There is a man in the corner booth," Rachel said, gesturing toward the far side of the restaurant. "Luca Calabrese. You know who that is." Aria did not know. She kept her head down. She did not ask questions about the men who came here, the ones who wore suits that cost more than everything she owned, the ones whose mere presence made the air feel heavier, colder, like stepping into a freezer. "He is the most feared man in this entire city," Maria continued, her eyes glinting with something that looked like mischief. "Nobody approaches him. Nobody speaks to him unless he speaks first. His men would shoot anyone who made him uncomfortable." Aria's stomach tightened. She turned away. "There is a dare," Gina said quickly, stepping into her path. "Kiss him. Just on the cheek. Quick. 1 second. That is all." "No." The word came out barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "If you do not," Rachel said, and her voice shifted now, became sharper, edged with cruelty, "you pay $50 into the pot. Right now. Tonight." Aria felt the walls closing in. $50. $50 was rent money. $50 was food for Emma for 2 weeks. $50 was the difference between survival and drowning. "I do not have $50, Aria said. "Then you do the dare," Maria said. It was not a question anymore. It was a sentence. The 3 women formed a wall around her, herding her toward the dining room, toward the corner booth where Luca Calabrese sat alone, a charcoal suit wrapped around a body built like something carved from stone. His dark hair was slicked back from a face that seemed to have been constructed for intimidation. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, white and thin like a blade. His knuckles were scarred too, visible where his hands rested on either side of a manila folder on the white tablecloth. Everyone in the restaurant pretended not to notice them. But they noticed. Every waiter, every couple at every table, every member of the kitchen staff watching from behind the swinging doors. They all noticed. Aria took 1 step forward. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Like she was watching herself from above, watching this foolish girl in a black and white uniform walk toward danger like she was sleepwalking. She could see the folder more clearly now. There was a photograph inside it. A child's face. A girl with dark curly hair and brown eyes and a smile that looked like it had been beaten out of her but was fighting its way back anyway. Emma. Aria's heart stopped. She took another step. Then another. The polished marble floor reflected the light from the chandeliers, making it look like she was walking on water, on glass, on something fragile enough to shatter under her weight. Luca Calabrese did not look up. He was still studying the folder, still completely focused on whatever was happening inside those manila covers, on that photograph of a child he was searching for. A child he had lost 5 years ago. Aria leaned down. Her breath caught in her throat. She could smell him now, cologne that cost more than her monthly rent, something sharp and expensive and dangerous. She could hear Vinnie and Theo rising from their table 3 booths away, their hands moving toward the insides of their jackets, their bodies tense like coiled snakes. Her lips brushed his cheekbone. It took less than a second. Barely a touch. A whisper of contact. Her face was so close to his that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could see the fine lines at the corner of his eye, could see the exact moment his pupils dilated with something that looked like shock. Then she pulled away. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Forks frozen midair. Wine glasses paused before lips. Conversations dying mid-word. The only sound was the gentle hum of the fax system and the distant clink of a glass being set down carefully by a waiter whose hands had started to shake. Luca's head turned slowly. Slowly. Like it was on a hinge that had not been oiled in years. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and Aria felt something shift in her chest, something ancient and terrible and beautiful all at once. Those eyes held the weight of 15 years of searching. Those eyes held a father's desperation. Those eyes held the knowledge that the woman standing in front of him, in her crisp black and white uniform, somehow knew something about the child in that folder. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then Vinnie and Theo froze, their hands still inside their jackets, their expression shifting from protective rage to confusion. They exchanged a look, the kind of look that passes between men who have worked together so long they do not need words. In all their years, they had never seen him look at anyone like that. Never seen that expression crack across his face like ice breaking on a frozen river. Aria turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her legs moving on instinct, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions at once. Behind her, she could feel his eyes following her into the shadows where invisible maids belonged. She did not know that he already knew her name. That he had pulled files on every member of the restaurant staff the moment he began his search for Emma. That he had studied Aria's photograph and her history and knew exactly how she had come to work in his mansion as a housemaid 6 months ago. That he had noticed her, the way she moved carefully through rooms, the way she always positioned herself closest to where Emma's photograph was being discussed. What Aria did not know was that this dare, this moment, this single second of contact, had just changed everything. She did not know that Luca Calabrese was about to uncover the truth she had been hiding. She did not know that in less than 48 hours, a freezing November night would drive her to a diner at 3 in the morning, bleeding and broken, with nowhere else to run. She did not know that her invisible life was about to become visible in the most dangerous way possible. Maria appeared beside her as she pushed through the kitchen doors, a triumphant grin spreading across her flour-dusted face. "You did it! You actually did it!" Aria did not respond. She could not. Her hands were shaking too badly to grip anything. Her breath was coming in shallow gasps. Outside the kitchen, in the dining room, Luca slowly reached for his folder and closed it. His scar caught the light from the chandelier above, creating a thin white line across his angular face. His men watched, confused, waiting for an order that never came. He simply sat there, his fingers resting on top of that folder, the folder containing Emma's photograph, his dark eyes staring at nothing at all. But 3 days earlier, when none of this was coming, when Aria's life was still just a grinding accumulation of small failures and smaller dollars, it had started differently. It had started with a knock on the door of her tiny apartment, and the foreclosure notice in the hands of a man who did not even have the decency to look ashamed. The notice sat on her kitchen table like a blade wrapped in ice. The words blurred together: 60 days to vacate, past due rent, legal proceedings, eviction hearing. The apartment was studio-sized, barely large enough to turn around in, but it was hers. Or it had been. Before the shelter's funding dried up. Before she had to choose between her own survival and Emma's. Aria sat at the table, her laptop open in front of her, searching for grants, emergency loans, anything that could generate $125,000 in the time she had remaining. The cursor blinked in the search box, waiting for her to type something that would somehow materialize a miracle. There were none. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, The shelter's director, I tried everything. The city cut funding. No donors came through. I am so sorry, Aria. I know what this means for Emma. Aria stared at the message for a long time without responding. Emma was 7 years old. She had been abandoned by her mother 6 months ago with nothing but a change of clothes and a drawing she had made in her kindergarten class. In that time, Aria had become the only constant in her life. The only person who showed up every single day and told her that she was safe. That she was wanted. That she was not alone. Now she was about to lose her. Aria opened the bottom drawer of her small kitchen cabinet, where she kept the envelope. $34 in cash, divided into small bills so she could portion it out carefully. Milk, bread, eggs, rice. The foods that stretched the furthest. The foods that kept her and Emma alive. She thought about Emma's face. The way her eyes had lit up last week when Aria brought her a used book about princesses and dragons. The way she had read it aloud in her small, careful voice, sounding out words she did not know, her finger moving under each line. The way Emma had fallen asleep with her head on Aria's shoulder, finally peaceful, finally safe. In 3 days, that would end. Unless something changed. Aria heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Heavy footsteps. Multiple people. The kind of footsteps that belonged to men who did not care who heard them coming. She stood up slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The footsteps stopped in front of her door. Then came the knock. 72 hours earlier, the linoleum floor of Mercy Street shelter was so cold it felt like kneeling on stone. Aria Harper knelt there anyway, her fingers moving through Emma's dark curls with practiced gentleness, braiding the 7-year-old's hair into 2 careful plaits. Emma's head tilted back, trusting, the worn prayer card with its faded image of St. Anthony clutched in her small fist. The card had belonged to Emma's mother once, before she disappeared. Before Emma became a ghost of a child with empty eyes and a voice that barely whispered. Aria tied the end of the second braid with a strand of blue thread she had carried in her apron pocket for 3 months. Emma turned to face her, and those dark eyes, so like someone else's, though Aria did not know whose, searched hers with an intensity that broke something inside her chest. "Are you coming back tonight?" Emma's voice trembled like a leaf about to fall. "Promise?" Aria pulled her close, breathing in the cheap shelter soap that clung to her hair, holding her the way nobody else did. The way a mother holds a child. The way this child deserved to be held. Always, little bird. Always. The door behind them opened. Margaret Chen stood in the doorway, the shelter's director, her face carved from stone and sorrow. She held a piece of paper that looked heavier than it should have been. "Aria. Can we talk?" Aria's stomach tightened. She squeezed Emma's hand once more, whispering, "Go get your breakfast, okay? I will be right here," and stood, her knees protesting. Margaret closed the office door behind them. The paper shook slightly in her grip. "The foundation pulled their funding," Margaret said. Her voice did not crack, but it could have. "The Westside Youth Initiative. They sent the notice this morning. We have 3 days, Aria. Until Friday at 5 o'clock. $125,000, or we lose the building. And when we lose the building, all 18 children go into the system." Aria reached for the wall to steady herself. The paper swam in her vision, all those numbers, all those signatures, all those official stamps that meant nothing could be stopped now. 18? The word came out broken. 18, Margaret confirmed. "I have contacted every donor I know. Every foundation, every church, every private donor who has ever given a single dollar to this place. Nothing. The economic downturn, the new regulations, the tax law changes, I do not understand all of it. I just know that by Friday night, this shelter closes and those children scatter into foster care. Into group homes. Into the kind of places where they learn that nobody wants them." Aria's hands curled into fists. She had $34 in her wallet. $34 divided into small bills so she could ration milk and bread and eggs carefully. $34 that represented the difference between eating and starving, between having a car that moved and taking 3 buses across the city. There was no way to make $125,000. There was no way to save Emma. Margaret's voice dropped. I know what Emma means to you. She cannot go into the system, Aria whispered. She is 7 years old and she has already lost everything. I know. She has nightmares. She wakes up screaming and the only thing that helps is if I, sit with her until she remembers she is safe. If she goes to some stranger's home, some group placement, she will think I abandoned her too. I know, Aria. I know. But knowing did not change anything. Knowing did not make miracles materialize. The shift at the Calabrese mansion began at 7:30 in the morning. Aria entered through the service entrance in her black and white uniform, her hair pulled back so tightly it pulled at her scalp, her face carefully blank. She had been hired 3 weeks earlier when the previous maid quit without notice, and in that time she had become invisible. The kind of invisible that rich people cultivated like a skill. She was background. Decoration. Hired help that nobody looked at directly and nobody learned the name of. The marble hallways of the mansion stretched like a palace designed to make ordinary people feel small. Aria kept her eyes down and moved like a ghost through the rooms, polishing the banister in the east wing, dusting the library where leather-bound books lined walls that went up 2 stories, cleaning bathrooms that were larger than the apartment where she slept. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when the house fell silent and the security detail rotated shifts, Aria entered Luca Calabrese's office. She was not supposed to. The previous maid had left a note taped to the door, never clean in here unless explicitly told. But the note had been there for 3 weeks and nobody had told her anything, which meant Luca Calabrese either did not care or did not notice, and either way, the office was beginning to look neglected. She cleaned fast, her hands moving on muscle memory while her mind elsewhere. The massive mahogany desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows that showed all of Los Angeles sprawling beneath the hills like a kingdom. The leather chairs arranged in a conversation pit. Her hand stopped moving. On the corner of the desk sat a silver frame. A photograph. A little girl with dark curly hair and a gap-toothed smile, looking directly at the camera with the kind of joy that belongs only to very young children who do not yet understand loss. Aria stepped closer. Her hands began to shake. The girl was wearing a yellow dress with small white flowers embroidered on the collar. Aria had seen that dress once, in the donation pile at the shelter, and she had washed it carefully and saved it for Emma's birthday because Emma's favorite color was yellow and Emma had never owned anything pretty and new. The nameplate on the frame was engraved in small letters, Emma Calabrese, age 2. Aria's blood turned to ice. She had braided Emma's dark curly hair every single morning for 6 months. She knew the exact pattern of Emma's smile, the exact way her left incisor was just slightly crooked, the exact way her eyes closed when she laughed. She had held this child while she screamed from nightmares. She had sung her lullabies. She had promised her she was safe. But Emma had never mentioned a father. The intake form at the shelter listed Emma's mother as deceased and her father as unknown. How could that be true when her father owned this house? When her father had hired 11 other staff members and a full security detail and apparently spent 5 years looking for her because the photograph was professional, the kind that cost money. Aria set the photograph down with trembling fingers. What she did not know was that 3 floors below her, in a secured room guarded by 2 men in black suits, Luca Calabrese was sitting across from a private investigator he had hired 5 years ago, the day his ex-wife Sophie had taken Emma and disappeared like smoke. The investigator was holding a folder. The folder contained an address. The address was a shelter in East Los Angeles. And attached to that address was a photograph taken 2 weeks earlier of a man speaking to a young girl with dark curls on the shelter's steps. The man was not Luca. But the girl was definitely Emma. Aria finished cleaning the office on automatic, her mind fracturing in 1,000 directions. She did not dust the shelves properly. She did not polish the windows until they shone. She left at 6 o'clock in the evening when her shift ended, her hand shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel of her 2004 Honda Civic, the only vehicle she owned, the one that had one working speaker and a dashboard light that flickered like a dying heartbeat. She pulled out of the service entrance and onto Mulholland Drive, the road that wound down the Hollywood Hills like a snake. The evening traffic was heavy, the sun bleeding red between the buildings. That was when she saw it. A note tucked under her windshield wiper, weighted down by a small stone. She pulled over, her heart beginning to race, and unfolded it with hands that would not stop shaking. The handwriting was familiar. Angular. Precise. The handwriting of someone who had practiced writing her name in the margins of everything she owned, years ago, when she was younger and had not yet learned to be afraid. I told you I would always find you. See you soon. D. Douglas Hale. Aria's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Douglas Hale, who had called her 53 times in 1 week. Douglas Hale, who had shown up at her previous job and told the manager she was stealing. Douglas Hale, who had convinced her last landlord that she was a criminal so he would evict her. Douglas Hale, who had smiled and smiled and smiled while slowly making her invisible in every way that mattered. She looked in the rearview mirror. 3 cars back, a black sedan. She recognized it. She had seen it parked outside the shelter twice in the last week. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, the night shift director at the shelter. Aria, where are you? Emma is asking for you. She will not eat dinner. Aria started the engine and drove. The streets of Los Angeles blurred past her, and the cold November wind tore through the broken window of her Civic like a blade wrapped in ice. Behind her, the black sedan followed, always 3 cars back, always there, always waiting for her to make one mistake. She had $34 in her pocket and 3 days to save a shelter that could not be saved. She had a job that no one knew she worked. She had a child who was not her child and a life that was not her life and a secret that was about to tear everything open. And now she had Douglas Hale finding her again, closing his hands around her life like the walls of a trap. The checkered floor beneath her feet seemed to tilt. Aria's breath came in short, sharp gasps as she stared at the photograph now sitting in her trembling palm, the prayer card with Emma's face smiling up at her, the edges colored with a child's careful crayon strokes of orange and purple. 3 months you have been ignoring my calls. That voice. Douglas's voice echoed in her skull even now, even as she sat across from Luca Calabrese in a diner at 3 in the morning with one eye swollen shut and bruises forming dark maps across her throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in pale, sickly white. Outside, the November blizzard howled against the windows, snow accumulating in drifts that seemed to grow by the minute. The black and white checkered floor, the red vinyl booths cracked and patched with silver duct tape, the smell of stale coffee and burnt toast hanging in the air like a curse, none of it felt real. Luca Calabrese was real. His presence was real. The way his dark eyes moved across her face, cataloguing every injury, burning with a rage she had never seen directed at anything but enemies, was unmistakably real. I have been looking for her for 5 years, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, the kind of sound a man makes when something inside him is breaking apart. 5 years, Aria. Every investigator I could hire. Every lawyer. Every contact. And she was there. She was at a shelter eating whatever you could afford to feed her while I was building an empire I thought was worthless without her in it. Aria's fingers trembled as she pushed the prayer card closer to him across the table. The diner's jukebox crackled between songs, creating a moment of static that felt like the world holding its breath. She asks about you, Aria whispered. Not by name because she does not know your name. She just asks if she has a father somewhere who loves her. And every time I tell her yes, I am lying because I do not know the answer. But I do now. Luca picked up the prayer card with hands that shook. His eyes filled with tears he did not let fall, not here, not in front of his men. Vinnie and Theo stood near the diner's entrance, their posture rigid, their faces revealing the shock of witnessing something they had never seen in 15 years of service. Marco Calabrese's oldest son did not cry. Marco Calabrese's oldest son did not show weakness. But he was doing both now, and the weight of it seemed to physically age him. Sophie took her on purpose, he said, each word coming out like it was dragged through broken glass. Not because she loved her. Because she knew I would spend everything, money, time, resources, searching. And while I was searching, she was working with my enemies. She was feeding them information about my operations, my properties, my weaknesses. She was using my desperation as a weapon. Aria leaned forward, and her hand crossed the table to touch his wrist. The contact was brief, but it anchored something in both of them. Why would she abandon Emma at the shelter if she wanted to hurt you? Aria asked. Luca's jaw tightened. Because I was getting close. The investigators were narrowing the search. Sophie realized the game was ending, so she changed the rules. She found a shelter where the child would be safe, where I would eventually find her, but only after 5 years of hell. Only after the trail went cold enough that my enemies had dismantled half my operation looking for weaknesses while I was distracted. Vinnie stepped forward, his face grave. Boss, we have been tracking the financial sabotage you asked about. The account closures, the job losses, the credit destruction. It all traces back to Sophie Langford's accounts and one man named Douglas Hale. He has been targeting Aria systematically for 8 months. Destroying her from the inside out. Luca's eyes shifted to Aria, and something dark and dangerous stirred in his chest, the same thing that had built his empire, the same thing that made men fear his name in 3 states. Tell me everything about Douglas Hale. Aria pulled her hand back. The bruises on her throat were already turning purple, already transforming her neck into a landscape of violence. She spoke in a voice that barely held together, telling him about 2 years ago, about how charming Douglas had been at first, how the control started small with checking her phone and isolating her from friends, how it escalated to shoves and threats and eventually to his hand around her throat in a parking lot because she dared to leave him. The police did not help, she said. His cousin is a sergeant. The restraining order is just paper. Not anymore, Luca said. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. Vinnie. I want every detail about Douglas Hale in the next 2 hours. Where he lives, who he works for, who his family is, what he owes to Sophie Langford, everything. And I want a unit at Mercy Street Shelter by dawn. Full security. No one goes in or out without my approval. He hung up and looked at Aria again. The gentleness was still there, but underneath it was something else, a promise. A vow. The kind of thing a man makes in the dark when he has nothing left to lose. The money, Aria said. $125,000. 3 days. I still have to find it. The shelter cannot survive without it. Luca set down his phone. At 6 o'clock this morning, $125,000 will be wired to Mercy Street Shelter's account from an anonymous donor. The foreclosure will be stopped. Your shelter will survive. But that is not the reason I am doing this. What is the reason? Aria asked. Because you protected my daughter when you had nothing. You kept her safe. You braided her hair and told her stories and promised to come back every single night, knowing that you were barely keeping yourself alive. You are not nobody, Aria. You are the woman who saved my child when I could not. The diner door swung open, a burst of snow and freezing wind pouring in with the November night. Luca did not look away from Aria's face, but Dolores the waitress glanced up from the counter, her expression shifting to concern. Something in that moment of distraction was enough. Across the street, in the shadows between 2 parked cars, Douglas Hale finished recording the entire scene on his phone. His hands clenched into fists as he watched Aria and Luca Calabrese, the man whose name whispered fear through every underworld street in Los Angeles, hold hands across a diner table. He typed out a message with shaking fingers. They found each other. Sophie is going to want to know this. The response came back in seconds, the words burning white on his screen, no. Sophie is going to want to escalate everything. Kill the deal. We are running out of time. The blizzard swallowed the sound of Douglas's footsteps as he walked back to his car, already dialing numbers, already setting in motion the final piece of a trap that had been laid for months, a trap designed not just to destroy one invisible maid, but to entangle the man who had just decided to save her. Luca did not know that his world was about to collapse. Aria did not know that everything she had just been given would be used as leverage. But 5 blocks away, in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city lights, Sophie Langford sat in the darkness and smiled as her phone buzzed with the video footage, the images, the proof that her ex-husband had finally revealed the one thing he cared about more than his empire. His weakness. His love. The snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless, burying the city beneath a white shroud. Somewhere in the darkness, Emma slept in the shelter's small bed, unaware that her father had finally found her. Unaware that she had become the center of a game far more dangerous than anyone had prepared her for. And in the diner, as the jukebox crackled back to life and an old song spilled out into the fluorescent-lit silence, Luca Calabrese and Aria Harper sat together, not knowing that the war was only just beginning. The morning light broke across the Mercy Street shelter like a promise nobody thought would come. Aria's hand trembled as she pushed open the playroom door, Luca walking behind her in his charcoal suit, his jaw tight, his breathing shallow. Emma sat in the corner building a tower with foam blocks, her small hands precise, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. She was 7 years old with dark curls and her father's eyes she had never seen reflected back at her in anyone else. The little girl looked up. She studied this tall man in the expensive suit, studying the way his hands hung at his sides like they did not know what to do with themselves. Emma tilted her head, processing. "Are you here to adopt me?" Luca dropped to one knee. His hands were shaking. His voice came out like something breaking. "No, Piccola. I am here because I am your papa. I have been looking for you for so long. I never stopped looking." Emma stared at him, her small face a mirror of confusion and something deeper, something that recognized him without knowing why. She turned to Aria. "Is he telling the truth?" Aria could not speak. Her throat had closed. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, little bird. This is your daddy. He has been searching for you every single day since you were born." Emma launched herself forward. She wrapped her small arms around Luca's neck and he caught her, lifting her, holding her like she might dissolve into air if he loosened his grip even 1 millimeter. His face buried itself in her hair. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. The man who commanded armies, who had built empires from concrete and blood, was breaking apart in a playroom with foam blocks scattered across the carpet. Margaret stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming. Vinnie and Theo stood guard near the entrance, both visibly emotional, both looking away to give their boss privacy, their hands resting on their sides out of habit and respect. The rain hammered against the windows. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Luca's breathing, ragged and broken, and Emma whispering, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," like she was testing out the word, like she was checking to see if it was real. This moment belonged only to them. 200 miles away in Century City, Sophie Langford sat in her glass and steel office on the 42nd floor, the city sprawling beneath her like a kingdom she owned. Her assistant had just delivered the news. She received the call at 11:13 in the morning. Calabrese found the girl. He was at the shelter this morning. The informant's voice crackled through the burner phone. Sophie's face went absolutely still. Not cold. Still. The kind of still that came right before something shattered. She hung up and immediately dialed another number. Douglas picked on the first ring. "I am moving up the timeline," she said, her voice clipped, precise, the voice of a woman who understood that everything she had built was balanced on a razor's edge. "Take care of Aria Harper today. Make it look like an accident. Make sure Calabrese is occupied when it happens. Douglas, what about my money?" "Sophie, you will get it when she is dead. Not before. And Douglas, if you fail at this, if you let her breathe one more day after this phone call ends, I will make sure you disappear so completely that even your own mother will forget you existed." Do you understand me? The line went dead. She made 3 more calls over the next 18 minutes. The first was to her contact at Child Protective Services, a woman named Patricia who owed her favors. I need you to open an investigation into Luca Calabrese's fitness as a guardian. Plant evidence of his criminal connections. Make it urgent. The second call was to a journalist at the Times, a man she had paid generously in the past. I have a story about organized crime infiltrating Los Angeles. I can give you the Calabrese family. The third call was to a woman named Victoria, her former business partner, the kind of woman who specialized in character assassination. Destroy him. Use everything. His past, his alleged crimes, his connection to murdered business rivals. I want his name dragged through every publication by tomorrow morning. Sophie ended the call and looked at herself in the glass wall of her office. Her reflection looked back, flawless and cold and terrified. She had built an empire from other people's misery. She had profited from pain. And now that empire was collapsing because Luca Calabrese had decided that one invisible maid mattered more than the war between them. She was not going to let that stand. At 4 in the afternoon, Aria sat alone in her studio apartment in Koreatown. The walls were the color of old bruises. The mattress sagged in the center, holding the shape of her body like a grave. She was packing a bag because Luca had insisted she stay at the mansion, where security was absolute, where Douglas could not reach her. Her hands moved through the motions, folding the 2 uniforms she owned, placing the 3 books into the bag, running her fingers across the worn St. Anthony prayer card that Emma had given her weeks ago, the one she carried everywhere like it was a map to safety. The weight of 72 hours crashed down on her shoulders all at once. She sat on the sagging mattress and felt the voice come, the voice that had been whispering for years. You do not deserve this. You are broken, you are damaged, you will only ruin them. Luca is kind because he does not know the full truth of what you are. Emma deserves a mother who is not fractured into 1,000 pieces. You are putting them both in danger just by existing in their lives. You should run. You should disappear. You should let them be a family without you there, broken and bleeding and needing rescue constantly. She stood. She walked to the window. The rain had turned to freezing sleet, streaking the glass, and the street below was a blur of greys and blacks. Her hands gripped the window ledge and shook. Her phone was dead. She had no car. She had no money. She had nothing except a bag of possessions that could fit in a closet and a prayer card from a 7-year-old girl who had already lost too much. Maybe everyone would be safer, she thought, if I just disappeared. Then she saw it. A chalk drawing on the sidewalk below, mostly washed away by the sleet but still visible, a stick figure family, 3 bodies with circles for heads, holding hands under a rainbow. Emma had drawn that same picture last week, her tongue poking out in concentration, saying with absolute certainty, "This is you and me and my daddy when he finds us." Aria stepped back from the window. Her breath came shuddering. She did not run. Not anymore. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Douglas was waiting in the hallway. He stood outside her apartment, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes the color of a bruise. He had a hunting knife, the kind with a serrated edge, and his smile was the smile of someone who had finally run out of patience. "Sophie promised me $50,000 for this," he said. "You should have just stayed with me, Aria. You made me do this." She tried to slam the door. He forced it open and backed her into her apartment, into the corner where her bed was, where nobody could see from the hallway. His voice dropped lower. "I loved you. I took care of you. And you chose him. You chose some mafia man over someone who actually cared." Aria's body moved on instinct. She threw the lamp at him, she threw her books, she scratched his face with her nails and ran toward the window and screamed until her throat was raw with it. He caught her from behind, his hands around her neck again, those same hands, that same grip, the weight of him pinning her down, the pressure building in her skull like her head was going to burst. She was fading. The room was turning gray. She could not breathe. The door exploded inward. Black-dressed men poured in like shadows. Vinnie grabbed Douglas by the collar and threw him against the wall. Theo and 8 others surrounded him, their movements synchronized and cold. Luca walked in slowly, his face a mask of perfect, terrifying control. He looked at Aria's bleeding face, her torn clothes, the knife on the floor. Then he looked at Douglas. Luca's voice was quiet. "You put your hands on her." "Twice." Douglas tried to sound tough. "I do not know who you think you are, but Sophie Langford paid me to." "I know exactly who paid you," Luca said. "And I know everything you have done." "Everything." He nodded to Vinnie. "Make the call." Vinnie stepped outside. The phone call took 90 seconds. 5 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled up to the curb outside the building. Men emerged, not Luca's men, but members of the Sarkisian family, the Armenian organization that had been at war with the Calabreses for a decade. Luca had made a deal that day. He walked Douglas down 4 flights of stairs, neither of them speaking, neither of them hurrying. At the ground level, Luca shoved him toward the open door of the first SUV. The Sarkisians dragged Douglas inside. His screams echoed up the stairwell and out into the rain. "What are you doing? Where are you taking me?" "Luca, please." "You wanted to hurt what is mine," Luca said, his voice carrying through the darkness. "Now you belong to them. They have been looking for someone to blame for the warehouse fire in Glendale. Congratulations. You just confessed." The SUV doors slammed shut. The vehicles pulled away into the freezing rain, and Douglas Hale was never seen again. Not by the police. Not by Sophie Langford. Not by anyone. He became the kind of disappeared person that the underworld handled quietly, without paperwork or evidence or mercy. At 8 in the evening, Sophie Langford stood in her penthouse, wearing a white gown, smiling for cameras. The charity gala was her most important event of the year, the night when she displayed her philanthropic heart to the journalists and influencers and wealthy donors who believed she actually cared about anything except power and money. The moment Vinnie appeared with the tablet, her smile froze. He did not bow. He did not ask permission. He simply walked to the center of the room and held up the screen for everyone to see. Bank statements. Emails. Recorded phone calls. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the ballroom like a blade. This is Sophie Langford ordering the destruction of an innocent woman. This is Sophie Langford orchestrating the abandonment of a child. This is Sophie Langford planning to sell information about Luca Calabrese's operations to his enemies. The room went silent. Journalists who had been celebrating her generosity started recording. Federal agents emerged from the crowd. Luca had called in favors with the FBI, had made promises that required nothing except the truth. They moved toward Sophie with handcuffs and documentation and no apologies. Sophie's face crumbled. "You cannot do this. I have lawyers. I have connections." Luca appeared in the doorway, and the room seemed to shrink around him. "You had connections," he said. Past tense. They led her away in her white gown, the fabric dragging through spilled champagne, her hair falling from its pins, her face raw and exposed. The cameras never stopped flashing. Her assets were frozen within hours. Her companies raided by morning. Her name destroyed in every newspaper, every broadcast, every conversation. 40 years in federal prison. The machinery of justice, once triggered, moved with brutal efficiency. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. 3 weeks had passed since the last photograph was printed, since the last headline stopped screaming Sophie's name across the newspapers of Los Angeles. The morning light fell through the kitchen windows of the Calabrese mansion in long golden rectangles, and Aria Harper stood at the counter with Emma's hair gathered in her hands, working a brush through the tangles with the same gentleness she had learned over months of invisible labor in other people's homes. But this was different. This was her home now. This was her daughter, not by blood, but by choice. By every night she had stayed awake beside a small bed, by every promise kept when everything else had been stripped away. Emma sat on a wooden stool, humming something tuneless and bright. She was 7 years old and had learned, finally, to believe that people stayed. Her small shoulders relaxed under Aria's touch. The humming continued. Somewhere in the mansion, water ran in the kitchen sink. Luca Calabrese, the most feared man in 3 states, was attempting to make pancakes. They emerged burnt. Completely, absolutely destroyed, the edges charred black like they had survived a war they should not have survived. "Papa, those look like they got angry at the sun," Emma said, and her voice carried the particular honesty that only children possessed, the kind that could demolish a man or rebuild him entirely. Luca set the plate down with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. His dark eyes, the same eyes that had once made grown men confess their sins, landed on Aria. There was no apology in his expression. There was something far more dangerous, amusement. A smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Your mother is much better at this," he said, and the word mother hung in the air between them like a prayer card someone had carried for decades. Aria's hand stilled in Emma's hair. She had never corrected him when he said it. She had never said, "I am not her mother, I am just the woman who loves her." Because the truth was far simpler and far more complicated, she was staying. She was choosing to stay. Every morning was a choice, and every morning she chose again. "Your father," Aria said, and she felt Luca's entire body respond to the word, "is learning. That is what matters." Emma giggled. The sound was like wind chimes in a safe breeze. Luca picked up a burnt pancake with his fingers, bit into it, and did not wince. His jaw worked. His throat moved. He swallowed. "Excellent," he said. "Inedible, but excellent." The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room where Luca once conducted business, but here, where the light was warm and the chairs did not match and Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator with magnets shaped like stars. She had drawn their family 17 different ways in the past 3 weeks. In every drawing, they were together. In every drawing, they were holding hands or standing in a line with the sun above them. In every drawing, they were safe. Vinnie appeared in the doorway at 7:24 in the morning, carrying a coffee cup with the precision of someone delivering medicine to a sick man. He set it in front of Aria without being asked. He knew her order now: 2 sugars, enough cream to turn it the color of warm caramel, a hint of vanilla if it was available. He had learned her like she was a code he had been tasked with cracking, and somewhere in the process of learning her, he had stopped treating her like an intruder in the Calabrese house and started treating her like someone who belonged. "Morning, Miss Harper," he said, and the formality was deliberate, a sign of respect that made her throat tight every time she heard it. "Good morning, Vinnie," she said. Emma stood up. "Vinnie, Papa made pancakes and they are the worst thing I have ever seen. You should eat one so you can tell him the truth." Vinnie's face shifted into something almost unrecognizable, amusement, genuine and unguarded. "I would be honored," he said. The day moved forward in these small moments. The texture of ordinary life. The weight of a coffee cup. The sound of a child laughing. The way Luca watched Aria from across the table when he thought she was not looking, the way his hand brushed against hers when she passed him the orange juice, the way his entire body language had changed in 3 weeks from controlled danger to something that resembled peace. Margaret Chen arrived at 9 o'clock with a folder that contained the rest of Aria's life. The paperwork was simple, as Mercy Street Shelter had received a $5 million endowment from an anonymous donor. The funds were already in the bank. The foreclosure notices had been shredded. All 18 children at the shelter would remain safe. $5 million, Margaret said, and she was looking at Luca with an expression that mixed gratitude with a question she would never ask out loud. "The children deserve safety," Luca said. "Nothing more complicated than that." Margaret turned to Aria. "We would like you to consider a position as assistant director. Starting salary, $64,000 a year. Health insurance. A retirement plan. Benefits for dependents." She paused. "In case you were wondering about the dependents part." Aria looked at Emma, who was showing Vinnie a card game she had invented, the rules of which appeared to involve making up different rules with each hand. She looked at Luca, who was watching her with dark eyes that held entire universes of patience. She looked back at Margaret. "Yes," Aria said. "I would like that very much." That afternoon, Luca and Aria stood on the terrace of the mansion while Emma napped. The Los Angeles skyline sprawled before them, a city of glass and light and people who had no idea that in one house, in one moment, someone was being rebuilt piece by piece. The November wind had softened into something almost gentle. "You saved me that night in the diner," Luca said. His voice carried the weight of confession. "I thought I had lost everything. Emma. Hope. Any version of myself that still deserved to exist." He turned to face her. "You gave me back my daughter. You gave me a reason to become someone different." Aria's hands trembled slightly. The scar on her wrist, the one from Douglas, the one that would fade but never completely disappear, throbbed with the cold. A map of what she had survived. A reminder of who she had been. "You saved me too," she said. "You showed me I was worth saving." He kissed her forehead first. Then, with impossible gentleness, he kissed her mouth. It was soft and careful and tasted like burnt pancakes and second chances. When he pulled away, Theo was walking across the garden pretending he had seen absolutely nothing, had heard absolutely nothing, and had certainly not been positioned outside the terrace door for the last 3 minutes out of sheer curiosity about whether his boss was finally going to stop looking at the woman like she had invented hope. Emma found them 10 minutes later. She burst through the terrace doors with the velocity of a small hurricane, her hair mussed from sleep, one cheek creased from where she had been lying on her arm. "Are you two getting married?" she demanded. "Because that would be awesome." Both adults turned the exact shade of the sunset. 3 months later, they stood in Mercy Street shelter. The building had been renovated. The walls were painted in colors that meant something, soft greens for calm, warm yellows for happiness, blues for safe days and red for days when sad feelings needed to be felt and witnessed. The children who lived here had learned that emotions were not problems to be solved but experiences to be honored. Emma ran between the other children with her blonde hair streaming behind her, completely at home, completely known. She had stopped asking if people were going to leave. She had started believing that staying was possible. Margaret stood at the front of the room, giving a speech that mentioned an anonymous donor with a generous heart. Aria felt Luca's arm settle around her waist, his hand finding the small of her back with the confidence of someone who had finally learned he was allowed to touch this person, to claim this connection, to stand in public and let everyone see what she meant to him. Emma presented her drawing to Margaret, 3 stick figures under a rainbow. Then to Aria, a drawing of a house with smoke coming from the chimney, where everyone inside was smiling. "Family is not just blood," Emma announced, the words Margaret had taught her. "It is people who choose to stay." Luca knelt down. His expensive suit pressed against the floor of the shelter. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "She is absolutely right, Piccola." He looked up at Aria, took her hand, and something in his eyes said everything. Some families are born. Some are built from broken pieces that somehow fit perfectly. "I started with $34, Aria said, and her voice trembled like a candle in the wind, and no hope. "I ended with everything that mattered." Luca stood. He pulled her close. He kissed her forehead while Emma cheered, while Vinnie and Theo clapped quietly in the corner, while the children of Mercy Street shelter surrounded them in a circle of light and safety and the kind of love that has to be chosen every single day to be real. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, and we believe it did, hit that like button right now. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story that will wreck you in the deepest way. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment below, what would you have done in Aria's position? What would you have risked? We will see you tomorrow with a story you will not believe.